If you ask someone to describe King Arthur, the image is almost universally identical. We picture a righteous monarch clad in shining plate armor, drawing a glowing broadsword from a stone pedestal. He is surrounded by a very specific, iconic entourage. There is Merlin, the wise wizard, Lancelot, the conflicted champion, Guinevere, the regal queen, Morgan Le Fay, the dark sorceress. These specific figures are so deeply ingrained in our collective imagination that they function as the open-source archetypes for modern fantasy. Almost every role-playing game, fantasy novel, and medieval cinematic universe uses this exact royal court as its foundational blueprint. We treat this version of the legend as ancient history, but this hyper-polished, chivalric Camelot is a relatively modern facade, heavily layered over a completely different and far darker origin. What remains of the legend if we systematically delete every character and trope invented after the Middle Ages? This diagram maps out the characters and concepts most people associate with the myth, but the defining features, Camelot, Lancelot, and the entire chivalric code, were entirely invented by 12th century French romantics. They were writing to entertain the aristocratic tastes of their contemporary audience, so they retrofitted Arthur into a refined French king. When you strip away those French additions, the traditional dramatic structure of Camelot completely collapses. You lose the love triangle, the pristine castle, and the shining knights. If the core pillars of the story we know are medieval fiction, we have to dig backward through the historical records to find the earliest mention of the king. We leave behind the polished marble of medieval France and step into the rugged, harsh reality of early Britain. A 12th century cleric named Geoffrey of Monmouth is responsible for giving Arthur a unified historical narrative. To create a cohesive British history, he extensively retrofitted Arthur's family tree. In the original, largely forgotten Welsh traditions, Arthur had actual sons named Am and Laco. They did not inherit a golden kingdom, they simply died young in battle. According to a 9th century text, Arthur even killed his own son, Am, and buried him in an unmarked grave. Dead children don't make for good dynastic drama, so later writers erased these obscure Welsh sons and replaced them with a new character, Mordred. The Vulgate cycle later escalated the tension by rewriting Mordred's origin entirely. He was transformed from a standard nephew into the biological product of unknowing incest between Arthur and his sister. Arthur's family was never a static historical bloodline. It was a flexible literary tool, heavily manipulated over centuries by competing authors to maximize tragedy and guarantee the king's eventual downfall. Without the family drama, we are left with the supposed historical bedrock of the myth, the persistent claim that Arthur was a real military commander who fought back the Saxon invasions. The ultimate piece of proof for this theory is the Annales Cambriae, or the Welsh Annals. This text precisely dates Arthur's decisive victory at the Battle of Badon to the exact year of 518 AD. This timeline tracks the early records of British history. The 10th century scholars who wrote the Welsh Annals didn't have contemporary records of Arthur's battle. They had to guess. They referenced an older text, Bede's Chronica Majora, which vaguely placed a key British victory between the years 474 and 491 AD. To narrow that window down, the scholars looked to the writings of a 6th century cleric named Gildas. He noted that the Battle of Badon occurred in the 44th year after that initial victory by Ambrosius. The 10th century scholars took the earliest possible date from Bede's window, 474 AD, and added Gildas's 44 years. The result is 518 AD. The single most precise historical anchor we have for King Arthur is a 10th century mathematical deduction based on conflicting texts. The historical Arthur is a manufactured equation. To find the true origin of the legend, we have to discard the 10th century math and look at the absolute earliest surviving records, 9th century Welsh poetry. In a poem titled What Man is the Gatekeeper, Arthur approaches a dark primitive fortress. When challenged by the guard, Arthur begins to boast of his exploits, revealing a character completely foreign to modern audiences. This Arthur has no code of chivalry. He is a gritty, wandering Celtic warlord commanding a band of supernaturally powered fighters, roaming a bleak landscape. Instead of jousting in tournaments, Arthur and his companion Kai are slaughtering armies of dog-headed monsters. They fight 9 witches on a mountain peak. They violently clash with a giant, terrifying feline known as the Cat of Palluque. These earliest surviving layers of the legend reveal a rugged monster hunter surviving in a landscape ruled by primal folklore. We are left with two completely incompatible figures: the polished, noble king of modern media and the monster-slaying Celtic warlord of early Wales. The myth of King Arthur didn't endure for 1,500 years by remaining historically accurate. It survived through a constant, aggressive process of cultural reinvention. The early Celts needed a monster hunter to make sense of a terrifying, untamed world. 10th century monks needed a historical military savior to legitimize their timelines. The French Romantics needed a tragic, chivalric king to entertain their courts. This retroactive sculpting shaped real-world power. Monarchs like the House of Tudor actively traced their own bloodlines back to these manufactured Arthurian family trees to justify their rule over England. There is no single true King Arthur waiting to be excavated. He is history's greatest open-source character, a permanent, adapting mirror that reflects exactly what the culture telling the story needs him to be.